Richard Kane stood at the huge window of his office on the top floor of Kane Tower. The building was 100 stories tall and looked out over New Angeles megacity. Flying cars moved between the tall buildings like tiny metal fish. Below him, millions of people went about their daily lives. Most of them would never earn in their whole lifetime what Richard made in a single hour. He was the richest man on earth. His company, Kane Dynamics, controlled almost all the trade between Earth and the space colonies. Every ship that carried goods to the outer planets had to pay Richard a fee. Every colony that wanted supplies from Earth had to go through his company. He had more money than some entire planets. Richard smiled as he watched the city below. He loved being powerful. He loved that people feared him. Most of all, he loved proving that he was better than everyone else. His personal assistant knocked on the door and walked in. The woman carried a tablet and looked nervous. Everyone who worked for Richard looked nervous most of the time. "Mr. Kane, sir," she said quietly. "Mr. Charles Webb is here to see you." Richard turned away from the window. Charles Webb was his biggest business rival. The man owned the second-largest shipping company in human space. He was also the only person who dared to challenge Richard directly. "Send him in," Richard said. Charles walked into the office like he owned the place. He was a tall man with gray hair and expensive clothes. Unlike Richard's other visitors, Charles didn't look afraid at all. "Richard," Charles said with a cold smile, "I heard about your little speech at the Colonial Board meeting last week." Richard remembered the meeting. He had told a room full of colony representatives that poor people would always be poor because they lacked the intelligence and class to be anything else. Several people had walked out in anger. "What about it?" Richard asked. "You claimed that breeding and education make all the difference," Charles said. "You said that someone from the lower classes could never fit in with civilized society, no matter how much money you spent on them." "That's right," Richard said. "It's simple biology. Some people are born better than others." Charles laughed. "I think you're wrong. I think with enough money and training, anyone can be made to look sophisticated." Richard felt his competitive nature wake up. Charles had challenged him, and Richard never backed down from a challenge. This was exactly the kind of bet he enjoyed making. "How much do you want to wager?" Richard asked. 1 billion credits, Charles said without hesitation. Richard's eyes widened slightly. Even for him, 1 billion credits was real money. But he was confident in his beliefs about social class and breeding. "What are the terms?" Richard asked. "The Galactic Trade Summit is in 2 weeks, Charles said. It's the most important social event in human space. Every major leader, businessman, and alien ambassador will be there. You have to bring someone from the lowest social class and make them fit in perfectly. If even one person realizes they don't belong, you lose." Richard thought about it. The Galactic Trade Summit was indeed the most prestigious event in human civilization. The guests included presidents of colony worlds, alien ambassadors, and the richest people in the galaxy. The social rules were complex and unforgiving. 1. Mistake could ruin a person's reputation forever. But Richard was sure that class differences were permanent. No amount of money or training could turn a poor person into someone who truly belonged with the elite. "Deal," Richard said, shaking Charles's hand. After Charles left, Richard sat in his chair and thought about who to choose for his experiment. He needed someone from the very bottom of society, someone who would prove his point perfectly when they failed. Then he remembered his maid. Maria Santos had worked in his mansion for 2 years. She was a refugee from New Harmony, one of the outer colonies that had been destroyed by alien raiders. She had lost everything in the attack and came to Earth with nothing. Richard had hired her because refugees worked for very low wages. Maria was quiet and polite, but Richard barely noticed her. She was just part of the background of his life, like furniture or wall decorations. She cleaned his house, washed his clothes, and prepared his meals. He knew almost nothing about her personal life and didn't care to learn. She was perfect for his purposes. A refugee maid was about as low class as someone could get. When she failed at the summit, it would prove once and for all that social breeding mattered more than anything else. Richard called for Maria to come to his office. She appeared a few minutes later wearing her simple gray uniform. She was a small woman in her 30s with dark hair and tired eyes. Like all refugees, she had the look of someone who had seen too much sadness. "Maria," Richard said, not bothering to look up from his desk. "I have a business proposition for you." She waited silently for him to continue. "I need someone to accompany me to an important business event," Richard said. "It's formal, and it requires someone who can behave properly. In high society, the pay would be substantial." Maria looked surprised. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would you ask me?" "My usual companions are not available," Richard lied smoothly. "This is purely a business arrangement. You would be representing my company, so you would need to meet certain standards of appearance and behavior." "What kind of event?" Maria asked. "The Galactic Trade Summit," Richard said, watching her face carefully. Maria's eyes widened. Even someone like her would know about the summit. It was broadcast across all human space and discussed in every news program. "Sir, I don't think I'm the right person for something like that," Maria said quietly. "The pay is 50,000 credits," Richard said. Maria went very still. 50,000 credits was more money than she would normally earn in 5 years. For someone who sent most of her wages to help other refugees, it was an impossible amount to refuse. "What would I need to do?" she asked. "Just attend the event with me," Richard said. "Smile, be polite, and don't embarrass me. I'll provide everything. You need clothes, jewelry, transportation. All you have to do is follow my lead." Maria was quiet for a long moment. Richard could see her thinking about what the money could mean for her and the other refugees she helped support. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it." Richard smiled to himself. The trap was set. In 2 weeks he would humiliate this refugee maid in front of the most important people in the galaxy. Charles Webb would hand over 1 billion credits. And Richard would prove once and for all that some people were simply born to serve, while others were born to rule. He had no idea that he was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Maria stood in her small room at the back of Richard Kane's mansion and stared at the agreement he had given her. The paper said she would receive 50,000 credits for attending one event. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. The money would change everything. She could send half to the refugee camps on Mars where her surviving relatives lived. The other half could help start the school she had been dreaming about, a place where refugee children could learn and have hope for the future. But something felt wrong. Richard Kane had never shown her any kindness in 2 years. He barely looked at her when she cleaned his office or served his meals. Why would he suddenly choose her for something so important? Maria had learned not to trust good fortune. On New Harmony, when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. The alien raiders had attacked on a day when everyone felt safe and happy. Her husband had left for work that morning saying it would be a perfect day. She never saw him again. Still, she needed the money too much to refuse. The next morning, Richard called her to his study. The room was filled with expensive books that Maria doubted he had ever read. He sat behind his massive desk like a king on his throne. "We have 10 days to prepare," Richard said without looking up from his computer. "The summit has very specific social rules. You will need to learn them all." He handed her a thick folder. "These are the protocols for formal galactic events. Study them carefully." Maria opened the folder and saw pages of complicated rules, which fork to use for each course at dinner, how to greet different types of alien ambassadors, what topics were safe to discuss and which ones to avoid, the proper way to stand, sit, and walk at formal events. "There will also be dancing," Richard said with a slight smile. "I've hired an instructor to teach you the basic steps." Over the next week, Richard put Maria through intense training. A dance instructor came to the mansion every day. The woman was kind but strict, making Maria practice the same steps over and over until her feet were sore. "Keep your back straight," the instructor said. "Remember, you're representing Mr. Kane's company. Everything about you must be perfect." A speech coach taught Maria how to speak like the wealthy elite. He made her practice saying words differently, changing her accent to sound more educated. Don't say gonna or wanna, the coach said. Always use complete words. Speak slowly and clearly. Never raise your voice even if you're excited. Richard also hired a stylist to choose Maria's clothes and teach her about makeup and jewelry. The woman brought dozens of expensive dresses to the mansion. You need to look like you belong, the stylist said as she held up different gowns. But not too fancy. We don't want people to think you're trying too hard. They chose a dark blue dress that was elegant but simple. The stylist taught Maria how to walk in high heels and how to sit gracefully in the long gown. But as the days passed, Maria noticed something strange. Some of the information Richard gave her seemed wrong. She had been reading about the Galactic Trade Summit online in her free time, and the articles said different things than Richard's instructions. Richard told her the event would be semi-formal and that she should keep her jewelry simple. But the news reports showed pictures from previous summits where everyone wore elaborate gowns and expensive jewelry that sparkled like stars. Richard said the aliens preferred humans to be casual and friendly. But Maria read that the Centauri, Alliance ambassadors, were very formal and considered casual behavior to be insulting. He told her that business topics were boring and she should avoid them. But the summit was specifically about trade agreements and colonial policies. How could she avoid talking about the main purpose of the event? Maria started to suspect that Richard was setting her up to fail. But why would he do that? What could he gain from embarrassing her? One evening she was cleaning Richard's study when she heard him talking on his private phone. He was laughing with someone about the bet and how easy it would be to win. She's perfect, Richard said to whoever was on the other end. A refugee maid who thinks she can fool the galaxy's elite. Charles is going to owe me 1 billion credits. Maria's blood went cold. Now she understood. This wasn't really about needing a date for the summit. Richard had made some kind of wager about her. He expected her to fail and embarrass him, which would somehow win him money. She quietly left the study and went to her room. Maria sat on her small bed and thought about what to do. She could refuse to go and give up the 50,000 credits. That was probably the smart choice. But then she thought about her relatives in the refugee camps. She thought about the children who had no schools and no hope. She thought about her destroyed homeworld and all the people who had died there. Maybe Richard expected her to fail. Maybe he had given her wrong information on purpose. But Maria had survived the destruction of her entire world. She had learned to live with loss and keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Richard Kane thought he knew what kind of person she was. He saw a poor refugee maid and assumed she was weak and stupid. He had no idea what she had been through or what she was capable of. Maria made her decision. She would go to the summit, but she wouldn't follow Richard's instructions. Instead, she would prepare her own way. For the next 3 days, Maria spent every free moment researching the summit. She read every article she could find about previous events. She studied the guest lists and learned about the different alien species that would attend. She researched the current political issues affecting the colonies. Late at night, after Richard was asleep, Maria used the mansion's library computer to access academic papers about interstellar trade and colonial governance. She had always been a good student back on New Harmony, and she still remembered how to learn quickly. The more she read, the more she understood how important this summit really was. The decisions made there would affect millions of people across human space. The alien ambassadors held the power to help or hurt entire colonies based on the trade agreements they signed. Maria realized she would be in a room with people who controlled the fate of refugees like herself. People who decided which colonies got supplies and which ones were left to struggle alone. This was her chance to speak for those who had no voice. Richard thought he was playing a cruel joke, but Maria saw an opportunity to do something that mattered. She would go to his summit, but not as his victim. She would go as herself. On the final night before they left for the summit, Maria packed her few belongings. She folded the expensive dress carefully and put it in the travel bag Richard had given her. Tomorrow, she would step into a world of power and wealth where she didn't belong. But belonging wasn't what mattered. Speaking the truth was what mattered. And Maria Santos had plenty of truth to share. The shuttle approached Titan Station slowly, giving Maria her first clear view of the most expensive space station ever built. The massive structure floated near Saturn like a jeweled crown. Thousands of lights sparkled along its curved walls, and through the transparent sections, she could see gardens and waterfalls inside. Richard sat across from her in the shuttle's luxury cabin, checking his appearance in a mirror. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit with diamond cufflinks that probably cost more than most people made in a year. His hair was styled perfectly, and his smile showed teeth that had been made white and straight by expensive dental work. "Remember what I taught you," Richard said without looking at her. "Keep your mouth shut unless someone asks you a direct question. Smile and nod a lot. Don't touch anything expensive." Maria nodded, but inside she felt calm and ready. She had spent the journey from Earth reading everything she could find about the people who would be at the summit. While Richard slept or talked to his business associates, Maria studied. She knew that Ambassador Chen from the Mars colonies had lost 3 family members in a mining accident caused by poor safety equipment. She knew that President Williams of the Europa settlements was fighting to get better medical supplies for his people. She knew that the representative from the asteroid belt was desperate to negotiate fair prices for the metals his miners risked their lives to extract. Most importantly, she knew about the alien ambassadors. The Centauri Alliance had been watching humanity for decades, trying to decide if humans were worthy partners or just another violent species to avoid. Their decisions at this summit could change the future of human expansion into space. The shuttle docked at Titan Station with a soft bump. Richard stood and adjusted his jacket one more time. "Showtime," he said with a cold smile. They walked through the docking bay and entered the main part of the station. Maria had never seen anything so beautiful. The corridors were made of polished marble and crystal. Real plants grew in carefully tended gardens. Artwork from dozens of worlds decorated the walls. But it was the people who took Maria's breath away. Men and women from across human space walked through the halls wearing clothes that sparkled with embedded lights and jewelry made from rare metals. Some had skin modifications that let them breathe different atmospheres. Others had cybernetic enhancements that glowed softly in the dim light. And among the humans moved the aliens. Maria saw her first Centauri up close, a tall, thin being made of what looked like living crystal. Light moved through its body in slow, beautiful patterns. Near the crystal being stood a representative from the Arcturus Republic, a creature that looked somewhat like a large, intelligent octopus but with skin that changed colors as it moved. "Stop staring," Richard whispered harshly in her ear. "You look like a tourist." They entered the main ballroom and Maria nearly gasped. The room was huge, with a transparent dome that showed the rings of Saturn spinning slowly above them. Hundreds of people filled the space, talking in small groups while servers moved between them carrying trays of food and drinks. Richard immediately began introducing Maria to people, and she could see his plan in action. He would walk up to someone important and say, "I'd like you to meet my date, Maria. She's my maid." Then he would watch as the person tried to hide their shock and confusion. The first few people they met responded exactly as Richard expected. A wealthy businessman from the Jupiter colonies looked embarrassed and quickly excused himself. A politician from Earth's moon base stared at Maria like she was some kind of strange animal. But Maria noticed something Richard didn't. Some of the people they met didn't seem shocked at all. A woman from the outer colonies looked at Maria with interest and asked thoughtful questions about her experiences. A trade representative from the asteroid belt nodded respectfully when they were introduced. After an hour of awkward introductions, Richard left Maria alone while he went to talk business with some other wealthy men. Maria stood by herself near a wall, watching the crowd and listening to conversations. She heard corporate executives discussing which colonies were most profitable. She listened to politicians arguing about tax rates and shipping fees. Most of the talk was about money and power, not about the millions of people whose lives would be affected by the decisions made here. Then Maria noticed someone walking toward her. It was the crystal being she had seen earlier, a Centauri ambassador. The alien moved with smooth, graceful steps that made no sound on the marble floor. "Excuse me," the ambassador said in perfect English. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I am Ambassador Zix-9 of the Centauri Alliance. I could not help but notice that you seem different from the other humans here." Maria looked around nervously. Richard had told her to avoid talking to the aliens, claiming they were dangerous and unpredictable. But the ambassador seemed polite and curious, not threatening. "Different how?" Maria asked. "You watch and listen," Zix-9 said. "Most humans here talk constantly about themselves, but you observe. You think before you speak. This is unusual." Maria found herself relaxing. "I'm trying to understand how everything works here. This is all new to me." "You are not from the wealthy class," the ambassador observed. It wasn't a question. "No," Maria said honestly. "I'm a refugee from New Harmony. I work as a maid." Zix-9's crystalline form seemed to brighten slightly. "Ah. And yet you are here at the most important gathering in human space. How interesting." Before Maria could explain, Richard appeared at her side. He looked angry and grabbed her arm. "Maria, what are you doing?" He hissed quietly. "I told you not to bother the ambassadors." Zix-9 observed this interaction with obvious interest. "Your companion was not bothering me," the ambassador said to Richard. "In fact, I found our conversation quite enlightening." Richard forced a smile. "I'm sorry if she said anything inappropriate. She's not used to these kinds of events." "On the contrary," Zix-9 said, "she seems more honest than most humans I have met tonight. I would very much like to continue our discussion later." The ambassador glided away, leaving Richard looking confused and angry. He pulled Maria aside to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "What did you say to that thing?" Richard demanded. "I just answered its questions," Maria said. "It seemed curious about why I was here." "Never talk to the aliens again," Richard ordered. "They're not here to make friends. They're here to decide whether humanity deserves to trade with them. One wrong word could ruin everything." Maria nodded, but privately she disagreed. Ambassador Zix-9 had seemed genuinely interested in learning about humans. Maybe the aliens weren't the problem. Maybe the problem was that they only got to meet humans like Richard Kane, people who saw other beings as either useful or dangerous, never as equals. As the evening continued, Maria met more people. She talked to a doctor from the medical colonies who was trying to get supplies for a children's hospital. She listened to a teacher from the agricultural worlds who explained how corporate policies made it hard for farming communities to survive. These people weren't wealthy or powerful, but they were at the summit representing millions of others. They were fighting for better lives for their people, just like Maria wished she could fight for the refugees. Richard watched her talking to these unimportant people with growing annoyance. This wasn't going according to his plan. Maria was supposed to embarrass herself and prove that poor people couldn't fit in with their betters. Instead, she seemed to be making connections and having real conversations. What Richard didn't understand was that Maria wasn't trying to fit in with the wealthy elite. She was finding her own people, the ones who understood struggle and loss and the fight to make life better for others. The evening was far from over, and Maria could feel that something important was building. She didn't know what Richard's plan was, but she was starting to form a plan of her own. The lights in the ballroom dimmed as dinner ended. A soft chime echoed through the space, calling everyone's attention to the main stage at the front of the room. Maria felt her heart begin to beat faster as hundreds of people turned toward the platform where the evening's main speaker would address the summit. Richard Kane straightened his jacket and smiled confidently. As the wealthiest human at the event, tradition said he would give the keynote speech. This was his moment to shine in front of the galaxy's most powerful people. He had prepared remarks about humanity's bright future and the importance of strong leadership in business. The summit coordinator, an elderly woman with silver hair, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored alien guests," she announced. "It is time for our traditional address by the evening's most distinguished attendee. Mr. Richard Kane, please take the stage." Richard stood and began walking toward the platform. The crowd applauded politely as he climbed the steps. He reached the microphone and looked out over the sea of faces, human and alien alike. But then Richard did something that shocked everyone in the room. Instead of beginning his prepared speech, he smiled his cruelest smile and spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for that warm welcome," Richard said. "But tonight, I'm going to do something different. Instead of boring you with another speech, from a businessman, I thought you might enjoy hearing from someone with a more interesting perspective." He turned and gestured toward Maria, who was sitting at their table near the front of the room. "My companion this evening is Maria Santos. She works as my maid, and she comes from one of the outer colonies that was destroyed by alien raiders. I thought it might be educational for all of us to hear what someone from her background has to say about our great human civilization." The room went completely silent. Maria felt hundreds of eyes staring at her. She could see the shock on people's faces. Some looked embarrassed for her. Others seemed curious about what would happen next. Richard continued talking. "Maria represents the common people of our colonies, the workers and refugees who depend on leaders like us to make the hard decisions. I'm sure she has some fascinating insights to share about her simple life and limited experiences." Maria understood what was happening. This was Richard's final trap. He expected her to stumble up to the stage and embarrass herself in front of the most important people in human space. When she failed to speak properly or said something foolish, it would prove his point about social classes. Everyone would see that poor people belonged in the background, not on stages with their betters. The crowd waited to see what would happen. Some people looked uncomfortable with Richard's obvious cruelty. Others seemed curious to watch the show. Maria stood up slowly. She could run away and hide in shame. She could refuse to speak and make Richard look like the cruel man he was. Or she could take the microphone and say what needed to be said. She thought about her husband, who had died when New Harmony was destroyed. She thought about the refugee, children living in camps on Mars who would never have the chances that wealthy children took for granted. She thought about all the colony representatives she had met tonight, who were fighting for their people while men like Richard saw them as numbers on profit reports. Maria walked to the stage. Richard handed her the microphone with a satisfied smile. He expected to enjoy watching her fail. But as Maria took the device and looked out at the crowd, something changed in her expression. The nervousness disappeared. Her back straightened. Her eyes became calm and determined. She began to speak. "Thank you, Mr. Kane, for this opportunity," Maria said clearly. Her voice carried through the ballroom sound system to every corner of the room. "You're right that I represent the common people of our colonies, and you're right that I have insights to share." She paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with people in the audience. When she spoke again, her words were simple but powerful. 5 years ago, I lived on New Harmony with my husband and our neighbors. We were farmers and teachers and shopkeepers. We worked hard and took care of each other. We thought we were safe, because the companies that owned our world told us we were protected. The room remained silent, but Maria could feel the attention of everyone present. Even the alien ambassadors were listening carefully. "One morning, alien raiders attacked our world," Maria continued. "They destroyed our cities and killed thousands of people. My husband died trying to help others escape. I survived because I was lucky, not because I was better than the people who died." Maria's voice stayed steady, but those who listened closely could hear the pain beneath her calm words. "After the attack, I learned something important. The companies that owned New Harmony had canceled our defense contracts 6 months earlier. They decided it was too expensive to protect a small farming world. They never told us. We died because someone in an office decided we weren't worth the cost of keeping us safe." Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Some of the corporate executives looked down at their hands. "I came to Earth as a refugee," Maria said. "I had nothing except the clothes on my back. I was lucky to find work, even as a maid. I sent most of my pay to help other refugees who had even less than me." She looked directly at Richard, who was no longer smiling. "Mr. Kane thinks that poor people stay poor because we lack intelligence or breeding. But I know the real reason. We stay poor because the people with power make decisions that keep us poor. They cancel our defense contracts. They charge high prices for medicine our children need. They pay low wages and tell us we should be grateful." The ballroom was completely quiet now. Maria could hear her own heartbeat. But she continued speaking. Tonight, I met colony representatives who are fighting for medical supplies for their hospitals. I met teachers trying to build schools for their students. I met workers from the asteroid belt who risk their lives mining metals that make the wealthy even wealthier. Maria turned to look at Ambassador Zix-9 and the other alien representatives. I also met alien ambassadors who are trying to decide if humans deserve to be trusted partners in the galaxy. They've been watching us, and they've seen how we treat our own people. They've seen worlds like mine abandoned when they stopped being profitable. The crystal being that was Ambassador Zix-9 seemed to glow brighter, as if Maria's words had affected it somehow. The ambassadors want to know what kind of species we really are, Maria said. Are we the kind that protects the weak and takes care of each other? Or are we the kind that sees other beings as either useful or disposable? She looked back at Richard, then at the wealthy and powerful people filling the ballroom. The answer to that question isn't found in our bank accounts or our fancy clothes. It's found in how we treat the people who have no power to help us in return. It's found in whether we remember that every number on a profit report represents a real person, with hopes and dreams and people they love. Maria paused, then spoke her final words. I can't give you financial advice or trade secrets, but I can tell you this. The galaxy is watching us, and they're not impressed by what they've seen so far. If we want to be worthy of their partnership, we need to prove that we're better than our worst impulses. We need to prove that we care about more than profit. She set the microphone down and walked back toward her table. The ballroom remained silent for several long seconds. Then slowly, one person began to clap. The first person to clap was Dr. Helen Carter from the medical colonies. She stood up from her table and applauded slowly, her eyes never leaving Maria's face. The sound echoed in the silent ballroom like a single raindrop hitting still water. Then, President Williams from Europa stood and began clapping. His weathered hands made sharp sounds in the quiet room. He had lost 2 sons in colony disasters caused by corporate cost-cutting, and Maria's words had touched something deep inside him. One by one, more people rose from their seats. The asteroid belt representatives stood, followed by teachers from the agricultural worlds. Colony governors who had watched their people suffer while companies counted profits joined the growing applause. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Ambassador Zix-9 rose from its seat at the alien delegation table. The crystalline being's body began to pulse with bright, beautiful light. Other Centauri ambassadors around the galaxy would later say they had never seen one of their kind show such strong emotion in public. The other alien representatives followed. The octopus-like being from Arcturus changed its skin to a brilliant gold color that meant deep respect in its culture. A methane-breathing delegate from Titan II made a high whistling sound that was its species' way of showing approval. Soon the entire ballroom was on its feet. The applause grew louder and louder until it became like thunder rolling through the space station. People who had never clapped for anything but their own success were applauding a refugee Maid who had spoken truth to power. Richard Kane stood frozen at the edge of the stage. This was not supposed to happen. Maria was supposed to embarrass herself and prove his point about social classes. Instead, she had somehow turned his cruel joke into the most powerful moment of the entire summit. The applause continued for several minutes. When it finally began to die down, Ambassador Zix-9 glided toward the stage. Its crystalline form caught the light from Saturn's rings and threw rainbow patterns across the ballroom walls. Ms. Santos, the ambassador said, its voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. That was the most honest speech I have heard from a human in decades of observation. Maria nodded respectfully. She had read that the Centauri valued directness and truth above all else. Your words have given me much to consider, Zix-9 continued. The Centauri Alliance has been watching humanity for 50 years. We have seen your species spread across the galaxy with remarkable speed. But we have also seen troubling patterns. The ambassador turned to address the entire room. We have observed human colonies abandoned when they stopped being profitable. We have seen corporate executives make decisions that cause suffering for millions while making themselves richer. We have wondered if your species possesses the wisdom and compassion necessary for true partnership with other civilized races. Richard felt sweat begin to form on his forehead. The alien was talking about exactly the kinds of business practices that had made him wealthy. Practices that most humans pretended not to notice, but that alien observers had been watching carefully. Tonight, Zix-9 said, Ms. Santos has shown us something we rarely see from humanity's leaders. She has shown us moral courage. She has proven that your species is capable of putting principle above profit, truth above comfort. The ambassador paused, and its crystalline body grew even brighter. The Centauri Alliance came to this summit, prepared to limit our trade agreements with humanity. We had evidence of too many decisions that valued money over life. But Ms. Santos has reminded us that a species should not be judged only by its worst members. Maria felt her heart racing. She had no idea that her words could have such important consequences. Therefore, Ambassador Zix-9 announced, the Centauri Alliance is prepared to offer humanity a new type of partnership. We will provide advanced medical technology, improved energy systems, and enhanced agricultural techniques. These gifts will be freely shared with all human colonies. Excited murmurs filled the ballroom. The technology the ambassador was describing could save millions of lives and improve conditions across human space. However, Zix-9 continued, and the room went quiet again. There is one condition for this partnership. Richard Kane felt a chill run down his spine. The Centauri Alliance will only work with humans who demonstrate the same qualities we saw tonight. We require a human representative who understands that true strength comes from protecting the weak, not from exploiting them. The ambassador turned to look directly at Maria. Ms. Santos, would you be willing to serve as Earth's primary liaison to the Centauri Alliance? The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Maria stared at the alien representative, hardly believing what she had heard. A refugee maid being offered one of the most important diplomatic positions in human space? It seemed impossible. I don't have any diplomatic training, Maria said quietly. You have something more valuable than training, Zix-9 replied. You have integrity. You understand suffering, and you care about preventing it. These are the qualities the Alliance values most. Charles Webb, Richard's business rival, began laughing from his table near the back of the room. The sound was loud and harsh in the formal atmosphere. This is ridiculous, Charles called out. You can't seriously be offering a major diplomatic position to a domestic worker. She has no education, no experience with interstellar politics, no understanding of trade negotiations. Ambassador Zix-9 turned its crystalline form toward Charles. When it spoke, its voice was colder than before. Mr. Webb, your comments reveal exactly why humanity needs representatives like Ms. Santos. You judge worth by social position rather than character. You mistake education for wisdom and experience for understanding. The ambassador glided closer to Charles's table. The Alliance has been watching your business practices as well. We know about the mining colonies where you ignored safety protocols to increase profits. We know about the supply shortages you created artificially to drive up prices. You are precisely the type of human we prefer not to work with. Charles's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Several other business leaders looked uncomfortable as they realized the aliens had been monitoring their activities more closely than anyone had imagined. Richard Kane felt panic rising in his chest. If the aliens were judging humans based on their business practices, his own record would not look good. He had made billions through exactly the kinds of decisions the ambassador was criticizing. Ambassador, Richard said, trying to sound confident. Surely you understand that business requires difficult decisions. Sometimes short-term hardships are necessary for long-term prosperity. Mr. Kane, Zix-9 replied, we are familiar with your business philosophy. We know about the defense contracts you canceled for worlds like New Harmony. We know about the medical supply delays that cause preventable deaths on outer colonies. We know about the wage policies that keep workers in poverty while making executives wealthy. Richard felt the eyes of everyone in the ballroom staring at him. His cruel joke had turned into a nightmare. Not only had Maria succeeded beyond his worst fears, But the aliens had exposed his business practices to the galaxy's most powerful people. "The Alliance has a message for humans like you, Mr. Kane," the ambassador said. "Change your ways, or find yourselves excluded from the future we are building." Zix-9 turned back to Maria, who was still standing near the stage in shock. "Ms. Santos, you do not need to answer tonight, but please consider our offer carefully. Humanity needs voices like yours in positions of real power." The ambassador returned to its seat, leaving the ballroom buzzing with excited conversation. Maria walked slowly back to her table, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. Richard Kane slumped in his chair, realizing that his billion-credit bet with Charles Webb was the least of his problems. His reputation was ruined, his business practices were exposed, and the woman he had tried to humiliate was being offered more power than he had ever dreamed of possessing. The summit wasn't over, but for Richard Kane, everything had already changed forever. 1 year later, Maria Santos stood at the observation deck of New Harmony Memorial Station, watching the stars through the massive transparent wall. The station orbited where her homeworld had once been, a beautiful reminder of what was lost and a symbol of hope for what could be built. She wore the flowing silver robes of a galactic ambassador, a position she had accepted after months of training and preparation. The Centauri Alliance had been patient teachers, helping her learn the complex art of interstellar diplomacy, but they had been right about one thing. Her integrity and understanding of suffering were more valuable than any amount of formal education. In the year since the summit, Maria had negotiated 17 major trade agreements between humanity and various alien species. Every contract included protections for workers, safety requirements for colonies, and fair distribution of resources. The changes had saved thousands of lives and improved conditions for millions more. The memorial station itself was proof of what could be accomplished when people worked together for the right reasons. The facility served refugees from across human space, providing medical care, education, and job training. It was funded by the new prosperity that came from honest trade relationships with alien civilizations. Maria turned as she heard footsteps behind her. Ambassador Zix-9 approached, its crystalline form glowing softly in the station's gentle lighting. The alien had become both her teacher and her friend over the past year. "The morning reports from the colonies show continued improvement," Zix-9 said in its musical voice. "Medical supplies are reaching the outer worlds on schedule. The mining safety protocols are being followed. Wages have increased by an average of 30% across human space." "It's a good start," Maria replied, "but there's still so much work to do." "Indeed," the ambassador agreed. "But humanity has proven it can change when guided by the right kind of leadership. Your species may yet become the partners we hoped you could be." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Maria thought about how much her life had changed since that night at the summit. She now lived in comfortable quarters on various space stations and diplomatic ships. She had assistants and translators and access to the most advanced technology in the galaxy. But the thing that mattered most to her was the work itself. Every trade agreement she negotiated, every policy she helped create, made life better for people who had no voice in the decisions that affected them. She had become the representative she had always wished existed, someone who remembered what it felt like to be powerless. "Ambassador," said a young woman's voice behind them. Maria turned to see her personal assistant, a refugee from the destroyed colony of Haven's Rest. The girl had been orphaned in a corporate mining accident and was now studying to become a diplomat herself. "Yes, Lisa?" Maria said. "You have a visitor," Lisa said with a strange expression on her face. "Richard Kane is here. He's requesting a meeting." Maria felt surprise but not anger. She had wondered if she would ever see Richard again after that night at the summit. "Send him to my office," Maria said. "I'll meet with him." Zix-9's crystalline form brightened slightly. "Are you certain that is wise?" "Yes," Maria said. "Everyone deserves a chance to change." 20 minutes later, Maria sat behind her desk in the station's diplomatic offices. The room was simple but elegant, with artwork from dozens of different worlds decorating the walls. Through the window behind her desk, the ruins of New Harmony were visible in the distance, a reminder of why her work mattered. Richard Kane walked into the office, and Maria barely recognized him. The arrogant billionaire was gone. In his place stood a thin, tired-looking man wearing simple work clothes. His expensive hair treatments had grown out, showing gray roots. His perfect teeth looked ordinary, without the constant, confident smile. "Hello, Maria," Richard said quietly. He didn't try to shake her hand or pretend they were friends. "Hello, Richard," she replied. "Please sit down." Richard took the chair across from her desk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I suppose you've heard what happened to me," Richard said finally. Maria nodded. The news had been impossible to avoid. After the summit, the story of Richard's bet and his cruel treatment of Maria had spread across human space. His business partners had abandoned him. Investors had pulled their money out of his company. The government had investigated his business practices and found enough violations to shut down Kane Dynamics permanently. Within 6 months, Richard Kane had lost everything. His fortune was gone, seized to pay fines and compensation to the colonies he had harmed. His mansion had been sold. His friends had stopped taking his calls. "I've been working on a cargo ship for the past 8 months," Richard said, "loading and unloading freight at different stations. It's hard work, but it's honest work." "How do you like it?" Maria asked. Richard gave a bitter laugh. "I hate it. My back hurts all the time. My hands are covered in cuts and calluses. I'm tired every day and I barely make enough money to pay for food and a place to sleep." He looked up at Maria with eyes that held no trace of his old arrogance. "But I understand now why you were angry that night. I understand what it feels like to be powerless. To know that people with more money than you are making decisions that control your life. I understand what it means to work hard and still struggle." Maria studied his face carefully. She had learned to read people during her diplomatic training, and she could see that Richard's suffering had been real. "Why are you here, Richard?" she asked. "I heard about the memorial station," he said. "I heard that you hire refugees and people who need second chances. I was wondering if there might be a place for me here." Maria was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the station hummed with activity as doctors treated patients, teachers educated children, and counselors helped people rebuild their lives. "What kind of work are you looking for?" she asked. "Anything," Richard said quickly. "Maintenance, cleaning, food service. I'm not proud anymore. I just want to do something useful, something that helps people instead of hurting them." Maria thought about the old Richard Kane, the man who had tried to humiliate her for his own amusement. Then she looked at the broken man sitting across from her desk, someone who had lost everything and was asking for a chance to start over. "Debuiko needs someone to manage the station's waste recycling systems," Maria said. "It's not glamorous work. You'd be responsible for making sure garbage gets processed properly and that nothing gets wasted. The pay is basic, but it includes housing and meals." Richard's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "You'd really give me a job? After everything I did to you?" "The person who matters isn't the Richard Kane who tried to humiliate me," Maria said. "It's the Richard Kane who's sitting here now asking for a chance to do better." She stood up and walked around the desk to face him. "But I want to be clear about something," she said. "This station exists to help people who have been hurt by the old system. If you work here, you'll be serving refugees, orphans, and people who have lost everything. You'll see the real consequences of the decisions that people like you used to make. Can you handle that?" Richard nodded slowly. "I think it's exactly what I need to see." Maria extended her hand to him. "Welcome to New Harmony Memorial Station, Richard. Let's see if we can help you remember what it means to be human." As they shook hands, Maria looked out the window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was watching humanity, waiting to see what kind of species they would choose to become. People like Richard could change, systems could be reformed, and maybe, just maybe, humanity could prove itself worthy of the partnership the aliens were offering. The future was still being written one choice at a time.